not about drugs. It's about life. It's about growing up. It's about how hard it is. Well, this researcher that I saw actually just 2 days ago, I spent the day with her, and she's in San Francisco, and she works with flies. And she has found that flies, believe it or not, are sort of genetically similar to us. I mean, a lot more complicated, but they do a lot of research on flies because they can learn a lot. I mean, they've broken, they've cracked sort of a lot of they know about cancer with fly research, and it turns out that flies get drunk and they get stoned. Actually, they don't get stoned in everything. They're not responsive to marijuana or opiates like heroin, but they do get high with cocaine and methamphetamine and alcohol. And she did these experiments where she sort of gave these flies the taste of these, whatever drug it was, whether in this case it was cocaine or alcohol. And she gave them more, and she showed me these flies, and you can actually tell what a fly is drugged. They do start to look like a human. I mean, they're kind of wobbly, and they can't quite fly very well, and eventually they kind of go into a stupor if they drink enough, if she gives them enough of this vapor. And they're unconscious for 20 or 30 minutes. And then they wake up, and anyway, so she programs these flies to get sort of a taste for alcohol or cocaine, and then she puts them in through these experiments. And has found that, she was describing this to me, her work is about genetics. She's trying to figure out what are the pieces of our genetic code that predisposes us to problems with alcohol or drugs, because we know that that's part of it. That's why people have, that's why people have problems, and some people have serious problems. It's because of the genetic piece. But anyway, so flies that were sort of normal would go along and know where the drug was, where the alcohol was, or the cocaine was, and they would be walking along, and she very kindly put like a metal piece on they couldn't fly because it was, to get to this thing, on both sides they could, but to get to this thing they had to go through a little tiny tunnel. And so they're going through there, and then she put a piece of metal that was electrified there. And so the flies would touch it, and they would leave, and they wouldn't come back, except for the flies that responded really well. I mean, that really liked. There were certain flies that just really got off on whatever it was. I mean, they were the ones who you may know, who on a Friday night, you go out, and they're not the ones who stop after they've had 3 or 4 drinks, but the ones who go on and drink, 10 shots or more, and they pass out, or they're smoking nonstop every single day before school and at lunch or whatever. So these flies would, not only would they not stop when they felt the electricity, but they would walk across this metal piece and continue to be shocked in progressive, sort of voltage. I mean, they would, in order to get the drug. And so, one thing that she showed was about where the compulsion comes from and how deep it is, because it's unlikely that these flies are being influenced by peer pressure or social pressure. They're responding to something that's very much inside who they. And the other thing, though, that she did was that she isolated, in her work, she's isolated the gene combination that she is saying is sort of one of the. They don't know for sure exactly what the combination is right now, but it's part of the key that will tell them at some point what makes some people addictive and some don't. And it's the same configuration that deals with stress response. And she said that they then did studies when they realized this. I'm talking too long. I'll be really quick. They did studies to test what happens if you put flies, normal flies, not necessarily ones that have this genetic predisposition. What happens if you put them in a situation where there are these drugs and if you stress them out? And I said, well, how do you stress out flies? And they stress them out by shaking them up and warming them up and putting them in really overcrowded situations. And then she said that they also do this thing where they deprive them of mates, and they get really stressed out because they are ones that are sort of not the dominant flies. They will try to mate with these virgin flies, as she said. And if a fly does not succeed, if a fly succeeds in that, then that's one kind of direction that they go to in their little fly life. But the ones who she would put with what were, there's another complicated word for it, but basically non-virgin flies the non-virgin fly won't be receptive to a male in that place, and the non-virgin fly would freak out, and the fly that, so the fly would not have sex. And that, if they repeated that, this frustrated male fly was more likely to do drugs and alcohol than any other kind of stress that she was able to put them through. Anyway, the only thing I'm going to say is that the conversation has to change, so it's not any longer about, don't do drugs, because we know that doesn't work. You can tell people forever not to do drugs. It's to figure out what's going on in your life, for teachers and counselors and therapists to help you figure out what's going on in your lives. Figure out, kind of what you want, where you want to go, what direction you want to go, and figure out, if that's happening, if you're tempted to use, or if you're using a lot, if you're using more, just to ask the questions, what is going on? Is it, and look a little bit deeper and see maybe there is something going on that should be looked at. Maybe there is some depression. Maybe there is some, just being overwhelmed. Anyway, okay, I'm sorry. Thank you. And I'm going to let Nick talk, and then we'll talk again. Thanks.